Welcome back. Steve Martin is the Senior Business Development Manager at the BBC and attending the Broadcast and Digital Media Convention 2024 taking place here at Swakopmund, which is where we're bringing the show to you from this week. Now, earlier today, during one of the panel discussions that was happening at the conference, there was a topic on visualization of radio, and of course we've invited Steve this evening to talk to him about the pros and cons, how they do it at the BBC, and perhaps we can learn a thing or two as well. Steve, good evening and welcome.
Hi Nina, it's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Oh, before we get into our topic of discussion, I just want to gauge, your thoughts on the last 2 days, the convention, and some of your key takeaways.
This is a really important convention for people in public service media in Southern Africa, and it has an international dimension too. And I think it's the only time every year that the Directors General of public broadcasters and technical experts as well can get together, can spend time stopping, thinking and learning from each other about the development of media at a really critical phase now for public service media across all countries.
Radio visualization, as I mentioned earlier, was a topic of discussion earlier. You weren't part of that panel, but you did make a comment which, of course, I found interesting, and I want us to talk about it a little bit in terms of what you guys are doing at the BBC. What you found has worked for you with doing this, and of course the challenges perhaps we can get into a bit later on.
Yeah, I think that the whole topic of radio visualization is well worth spending time talking about, and it was great to see it having so much time devoted to it on the schedule today at the conference. And it's really important to make sure that when you start adding visual elements to radio, you don't end up making the wrong calls and ending up with bad television. It's a very different medium, and what we learned at the BBC is if you are adding visualization, you must never do anything that disrupts the experience for the vast majority of listeners who will still just want to be listening to the audio, having the radio on in the background, in the car, with their favourite music, friends and family popping up, and their favourite personalities, keeping them company through the day. That's what radio is all about. It's what it does really well, and if you get it wrong, the visualization can take over, and you can have too much clutter in the studio. You can have presenters who are paying attention to the way they look rather than the way they sound for the listener on air. And we've made those mistakes, and we've worked through it because we've been doing this for quite a long time. And it was great to hear broadcasters from across Africa, both public service, publicly funded broadcasters, and those in the private commercial sector as well, sharing their experiences today.
So what model has worked for the BBC in implementing visualization within radio?
Yeah, it changes all the time because the technology is changing, and it always goes back to the audience's expectation of what radio is. And if you have been listening to the radio for 30 years or so, you probably wouldn't know what half the personalities on the stations you looked like 30 years ago. But now, of course, thanks to social media and websites and cross-media organisations like the NBC that have television channels and radio and talent that crosses both platforms, we've got a much wider number of touch points where we can introduce personalities to audiences in a visual way as well as a radio way. But we made mistakes early on, and one of the things we did at the BBC that just didn't work, was a really important learning point for us, was to just try to stick cameras in the studio and stream the whole thing 24 hours a day. And there's several reasons why that didn't work. Firstly, we put the cameras in the wrong place. We put them high up in the corners of the studio. So what you saw on the screen, on the website, looked really like a security camera video, like CCTV. And the other thing we didn't really think through properly at first was that the studio is not always populated all day long, because some programs are pre-recorded, some programs may come from another studio that doesn't have cameras in it, and yet the web stream live on the website was still running 24 hours a day. So we worked through those challenges very quickly in an iterative process, learning as we go. And we ended up with better lighting in the studios, much better placement for the cameras at eye level, which looks much better on screen. And then the other thing we've done at the BBC, as social media has become a more important place for people to discover new content, is to video interviews and then clip out the best bits and just share those small nuggets. It could be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, onto the social media platforms, and then use that as a way to encourage listeners to enjoy more content from our broadcasts.
Also, during that panel discussion this morning, when they spoke about, employing the visual aspect into radio, there was a concern that this might make radio become redundant, because now essentially, and I guess it does become television as well. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it has to be a layer on top of radio, because the radio is the biggest platform in almost all African countries, and people listen for hours and hours every day. People have their favourite stations, and they're very loyal to their favourite personalities on radio. And you mustn't destroy that, because that's got a special magic about it. And for broadcasters who rely on commercial income, that's also the revenue source. That's the way that the money comes into the broadcaster to fund everything they do. So that has to remain absolutely precious and sacrosanct. But you can layer on bits of visualization, and as social media becomes a more dominant force in our lives, as more people have smartphone technology in their hands, then it's incumbent on broadcasters to go and take their radio station brands out to the audience on all the platforms and devices that they love to use.
Fantastic. Well, Mr. Martin, I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And of course, enjoy the rest of your stay here in Swakopmund.
Thank you, Nina. It's been a pleasure.